Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the remarkably tangled lives of some of the most inbred women to ever grace medieval history. Born from cousins, wed to uncles, and sometimes, disturbingly, both, these royal ladies were caught in a dynastic tradition that prized keeping things in the family, genetically and politically. So before we begin tonight's journey through the gene pool with no shallow end, take a quick moment to hit the like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is as you tune in. It's always fascinating to see just how global this little historical rabbit hole has become. Now, dim the lights. Maybe flip on a fan for that soothing background hum. And let's ease into tonight's story together. Juana of Castile entered the world in 1479, the third child of two very powerful and very related people. Her parents were none other than Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the same royal duo who funded Columbus's voyage, expelled the Moors, and for some reason still believed that marrying cousins was a strategic masterstroke. Juana came from the Spanish Trastamara dynasty, a line already famous for marrying within its own circle long before she was born. By the time she arrived, the royal bloodline had been stirred just enough to keep things functioning, but not enough to prevent issues like emotional volatility, persistent melancholy, and the occasional unfortunate chin. As a teenager, Juana was shipped off to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, and despite his charming title, he was more of a peak performance Habsburg than a heartthrob. Naturally, he was her cousin. Of course he was. The Habsburgs were obsessed with two things: stacking royal titles and completely ignoring the genetic consequences of their habits. Initially, things seemed promising. Juana was smart, captivating, and genuinely appeared to adore Philip. Sadly, that affection was not exactly mutual. Philip was less devoted to Juana and more enamored with nearly every woman who wasn't his wife. Her passionate temperament and intense jealousy didn't sit well in a court used to lukewarm marriages and half-hearted fidelity. When Philip died, suddenly, of typhoid allegedly, or perhaps something more karmic, Juana didn't handle it well. In fact, she downright refused to be separated from his corpse. Literally, she had his coffin carted around with her as she traveled through Spain, occasionally opening it just to check on him. Medieval romanticism? Perhaps. Or maybe something else entirely. Her political enemies, and there were many, jumped on this behavior. Her father Ferdinand used it as supposed proof that she was mentally unfit to govern. Her son Charles, later Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, conveniently echoed that claim. Both ended up ruling in her stead, while Juana spent the majority of her life under supervision in a convent. But was Juana truly insane? Historians still debate it. Some argue she suffered from genuine mental illness, worsened by grief and confinement. Others believe she was simply politically inconvenient, a passionate woman who dared to care when infidelity was expected to be ignored. In a world where emotional expression from a royal woman was treated like treason, Juana was labeled mad. She wasn't just a tragic royal. Juana was the embodiment of immense dynastic pressure entangled in centuries of inbreeding and armed with the world's least effective coping strategies. And if there were a genetic trophy for most predictable outcome, Maria Anna of Spain would be polishing it, while her son drooled on it. Born in 1634, Maria Anna was the daughter of King Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, who, yes, were cousins in that particularly zealous Habsburg tradition. Naturally, Maria Anna married her uncle, not a distant cousin, not a family friend. Her actual, literal uncle, Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor. Because when your family tree is basically a pretzel, doubling down is just tradition. Maria Anna, for what it's worth, was bright, devout, multilingual, politically savvy, and reportedly quite kind. She brought a certain dignity to court life, and the genetic equivalent of copying a photocopy. Her most infamous legacy, giving birth to Charles II of Spain, arguably the most inbred monarch in all of European history. Charles inherited not just the crown, but the entire backlog of Habsburg genetic misfires. A grotesquely enlarged jaw, a barely there chin, chronic illness, infertility, and what many believe was a cognitive delay. He struggled with basic daily functions like chewing and speaking, understandable before coffee, perhaps, but less forgivable when you're running an empire. Was this all Maria Anna's fault? Of course not. She didn't invent the Habsburg marriage strategy. She just played her role in the centuries-long tradition of transforming alliances into genetic roulette. And to her credit, she deeply loved Charles, shielding him as best she could from the treacherous web of court intrigue. She served as his regent while he was young and tried to protect him from the vipers in velvet. Maria Anna died in 1696, just 1 year after her son. The Spanish Empire, already buckling under the weight of its own dysfunction, soon collapsed into the War of Spanish Succession, sparked partly because Charles II, unsurprisingly, failed to produce an heir. And if you've ever wondered what happens when a family treats marriage like a math equation, look no further than Isabella of Habsburg. Born in 1501, Isabella was the daughter of Philip the Handsome, yes, him again, and Juana of Castile, also known as Juana the Mad, though by this point, Juana the Understandably Frazzled feels more appropriate. This lineage made Isabella the sister of Emperor Charles V, and the niece of roughly half the royal houses of Europe. Her DNA wasn't so much a mystery as it was a very repetitive royal recipe, heavy on Habsburg, with a splash of Trastamara, and absolutely no genetic diversity. At 17, Isabella was married off to Christian II of Denmark, a king known for ambitious reforms, erratic moods, and the constant vibe of a man one bad breakfast away from flipping a throne. Their marriage was, predictably, both politically calculated and deeply awkward. Of course, they were cousins, but the real genetic kicker? Isabella's Habsburg background was already looping like a screensaver stuck on one image. She was expected to bring grace, charm, and diplomatic value to Denmark, while also subtly masking the fact that her family tree had no branches. But life in the Danish court was far from kind to her. Christian's reign crumbled under pressure, and Isabella found herself navigating the cold turbulence of foreign politics with a face full of royal expectations and a bloodstream full of recycled DNA. He was overthrown, locked away, and at one point even exiled. Through it all, Isabella remained by his side, loyally following him wherever fate dragged them. Call it undying love or hereditary stubbornness, either way, her devotion never wavered. Unfortunately, the endless political tension and relentless court drama took a serious toll on her health. After years of stress, exile, and perhaps complications related to childbirth, she died tragically young, just 24 years old. Their children, naturally, kept up the noble family tradition of marrying within the bloodline. One of them, Dorothea, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, a respectable Habsburg match. Because if there was one thing the dynasty cherished more than elaborate titles and perfectly angular jawlines, it was ensuring no family reunion ever required introductions or name tags. Eleanor of Austria was born in 1498, which already put her in a tight spot, wedged between the dawn of the Renaissance and an avalanche of royal expectations. She was the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile, making her not only the older sister of Charles V, but also the proud bearer of what could only be described as deluxe Habsburg DNA. Her childhood was essentially a royal waiting room, and her adolescence was spent bouncing from one potential engagement to another. At one point, she was nearly married off to Henry VIII of England. That fell through. Luckier, dodging that union might have been one of the rare instances where Habsburg matchmaking accidentally improved someone's quality of life. Instead, Eleanor's first marriage was to Manuel I of Portugal, significantly older, and of course, her first cousin once removed. In the twisted world of royal matrimony, that was about as common as marrying the boy next door. She became Queen of Portugal, had 2 children, and was widowed before turning 30. So naturally, the solution was to remarry, this time to Francis I of France, who rather romantically had previously been held prisoner by her brother Charles V, because nothing says romance quite like post-captivity negotiations. Francis wasn't exactly charmed by Eleanor. He saw her more as a diplomatic olive branch with a Habsburg seal than an actual partner. Their marriage was childless, cold, and deeply formal. While Francis busied himself with mistresses, Eleanor spent her days in prayer, reading, and politely pretending not to notice the distance. Despite being Queen of France, Eleanor remained quietly loyal to her Habsburg roots. And honestly, who could blame her? They may have been inbred, but at least they were consistent. Eleanor managed to outlive both her husbands and retreated gracefully into the political background. She died in 1558, remembered for her unwavering composure, deep piety, and for accomplishing the nearly impossible, surviving 2 royal marriages without causing a scandal. That alone should have earned her an Olympic medal, especially in her family. Her life was not one of great conflict or historic upheaval, but a lesson in quiet endurance. She didn't launch wars or break dynasties. Instead, she fulfilled the classic Habsburg female job description: marry the cousin, bear the heir, and ignore how alarmingly strong the family resemblance had become with each passing generation. Catherine of Aragon was born in 1485 to to Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, Spain's ultimate power couple and unofficial architects of royal genetic bottlenecking. As a princess of two United Kingdoms, Catherine had everything: status, education, wealth, and a family tree that curled tighter than a medieval drinking song. By the age of 3, she was already promised to Arthur, Prince of Wales, the eldest son of England's Henry VII. Why? Because Europe's monarchs had a beloved tradition of marrying cousins to cousins, preferably ones with matching coats of arms. Catherine and Arthur were second cousins through John of Gaunt, a relationship distant enough to be overlooked, but close enough to maintain political consistency. They married in 1501, and 5 months later, Arthur was dead. The marriage, particularly whether it was consummated, became one of the most controversial questions in English history. It would go on to spark the Reformation, derail a dynasty, and confuse legal scholars for centuries. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself stuck, young, widowed, in limbo, and still in England. Her dowry hadn't been returned, and she was very much a diplomatic pawn waiting for the next royal move. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother, and eventually her second husband. Because when your family thrives on recycling names, thrones, and occasionally spouses, marrying 2 brothers just feels like tradition. In the beginning, Henry and Catherine seemed genuinely affectionate. She was brilliant, elegant, and politically sharp. She brought him not just love, but legitimacy, an alliance with Spain, and a string of pregnancies. Sadly, only one child survived, Mary, later known as Mary I. But Henry wanted a son, desperately, and after years of miscarriages and deep emotional strain, Catherine could not give him one. That's when things turned from difficult to disastrous. Henry claimed their marriage was invalid since she'd previously been wed to his brother. Catherine, backed by the Pope, stood firm. It was a true and lawful marriage. What followed was the most dramatic annulment saga in history, complete with theological debates, diplomatic threats, and a king so determined to get his way that he created his own church just to leave her. Catherine was banished, stripped of her title, and forced to live out the remainder of her days in isolation. Yet she never stopped asserting her rightful place as queen. Her bloodline was royal, no doubt, but concentrated to the point of legend. Her marriage didn't shape history through warfare or empire. It reshaped it through heartbreak and the perils of dynastic matchmaking gone too far. Margaret of Austria entered the world in 1480, the only daughter of Emperor Maximilian of Austria and Mary of Burgundy. As a Habsburg from birth, her family tree resembled a perfectly closed circle, possibly drawn by a toddler with a crown and no adult supervision. From an early age, Margaret's life was wrapped in strategic packaging. At just 3 years old, she was engaged to Charles VIII of France. But by 12, she was returned like an ill-fitting gown when Charles married Anne of Brittany instead, because her lands were more geographically advantageous. Margaret, ever composed, is said to have remarked, "I shall be revenged," and in her own quiet, relentless way, she was. Her second engagement was to Juan of Castile, yes, another cousin, crafted to tighten the Habsburg grip on Spain. But one died shortly after they wed, leaving Margaret, not yet 20, already widowed and twice burned by royal marriage. Other suitors came and went, including one of Henry's 7 sons. But Margaret had had enough. She officially retired from royal matchmaking and chose a life of autonomy and service instead. She never married again, devoting herself fully to governance, diplomacy, and simply surviving her family, a monumental task in itself. Appointed governor of the Netherlands by her nephew Charles V, Margaret ruled with intelligence, political finesse, and the iron-willed endurance only a Habsburg could inherit. She negotiated peace, managed rebellious provinces, and proved to be one of the few women in European history entrusted with real authority, not because she bore an heir, but because she knew how to rule. And let's be honest, it also helped that she wasn't busy birthing her uncle's cousin's next heir. Despite the endless whirlwind of dynastic politics surrounding her, Margaret managed to live a life that was, by Habsburg standards, remarkably free of scandal. She poured her energy into collecting fine art, promoting music, and even took on the thankless task of trying to teach young Charles, yes, that Charles, some basic skills in statecraft. Not an easy assignment, considering he became emperor at just 19 and was somehow related to nearly every crowned head on earth. Margaret passed away in 1530 after what started as a relatively minor foot injury turned deadly, because in the medieval world, medicine was less about healing and more about offering a very polite, expensive way to die. Yet, despite everything, she remains one of the rare Habsburg women remembered more for her governance and political influence than just her bloodline, though naturally, that bloodline was still very inbred. Blanche of Castile was born in 1188, during a time when marrying your cousin wasn't considered a biological hazard. It was a power move. As the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England, and the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, Blanche didn't just come from royalty. She practically bled dynastic legacy. By the time she could walk, her family was already planning which relative she'd marry. A lucky groom? Louis VIII of France. Her cousin, of course, and not a distant blink. And you miss a kind of cousin. We're talking shared grandparents. Should we still do this? Definitely, said medieval politics. After all, if your future spouse didn't share a branch on your family tree, it was considered a diplomatic misstep. At just 12 years old, Blanche crossed the Channel to marry Louis. His father, King Philip II, is said to have commented, "She is small, but she will grow." Charming, and thus began Blanche's lifelong game of royal chess, religious leadership, and ignoring the glaring fact that most of her husband's ancestors were also her own. Blanche wasn't content to simply be a ceremonial figure. When Louis became king, she served as queen consort, and after his death, she ruled as regent for her young son, Louis IX, later known as Saint Louis. She governed France with the focus of a woman who knew exactly how dangerous her relatives could be. She led crusades, suppressed rebellions, and managed to hold the kingdom together, all while contending with barons who distrusted her both for being a woman and for being slightly too Castilian for their liking. She answered their doubts with diplomacy, strategy, and, when needed, well-placed house arrests. Genetically, Blanche was the culmination of centuries of royal intermarriage. English, Castilian, French, all packed tightly into one determined little queen. If DNA had warning signals, hers would have been flashing red, fiercely protective, deeply pious, and never to be underestimated. Blanche raised a saint, but she's the one who made sure he survived long enough to become one. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which, being Habsburg, meant she entered the world already infused with half a crown and half a family reunion. Her parents, Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia, and Anne of Foix-Candale, might sound like a refreshing mix, but don't be fooled. This was still a heavily curated list of repeat royal connections. From childhood, Anne knew she'd be married off like a diplomatic scroll, sealed with royal wax. In 1521, at the mature age of 18, she wed her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would later become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. That's right, double first cousin. They shared both sets of grandparents. Think of it as a medieval version of marrying your genetic reflection. In today's world, marrying your double first cousin would raise eyebrows. In the Habsburg world, it raised dynastic security and probably a few chromosomal red flags. Still, politically, the marriage was a masterstroke. It united the Habsburgs with the thrones of Hungary and Bohemia and cemented their dominance over Central Europe. It also produced 15 children. Yes, 15. Because if you're going to fuse bloodlines, why not do it with industrial efficiency? Anne was described as devout, gentle, and duty-bound. In other words, a royal woman who did her job without complaint, even as she was slowly turned into the human glue holding together a jigsaw puzzle made of treaties and family trees. She traveled extensively with Ferdinand, holding court in various cities depending on which region needed a reminder that the Habsburgs were still in charge and still very much into marrying their own kin. Sadly, Anne died young in 1547, most likely worn down by the rigors of endless childbirth, political obligations, and pretending her family's obsession with cousin weddings wasn't totally insane. She didn't live long enough to see Ferdinand crowned emperor, but through her, the Habsburg grip on Central Europe became nearly unshakable. Anne's life was a case study in dynastic inbreeding, a woman born into a world that prized borders over biology and political order over personal well-being, and somehow still ended up birthing half the rulers of the continent. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, reigned during the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just in style. It was an aristocratic survival strategy. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois, Joanna entered the world draped in royal legitimacy and already carrying multiple layers of cousin marriage credentials. Her lineage was a Mediterranean tangle. On one side, the French house of Valois. On the other, the Angevins of Naples. Kings were her uncles, kings were her cousins, and her future husbands were destined to be both. Her first husband was Andrew of Hungary, her cousin, of course. Their marriage, arranged by the Pope, was awkward, unpopular, and deeply political. Andrew was reportedly crude, widely disliked, and about as welcome in Naples as a tax audit. Joanna wasn't thrilled. Neither were the nobles. And not long after he was crowned co-ruler, Andrew was murdered, strangled, likely with a curtain cord, and possibly with Joanna's full awareness. Let's just call it mutual incompatibility. She would go on to marry 3 more times, each to a man of noble rank, each with varying degrees of blood relation. Louis of Taranto, her cousin. James IV of Majorca, also a cousin. And finally Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, a rare outlier with barely any family connection, which was almost scandalous. Politically, Joanna was a force. She ruled Naples in her own right, challenged papal authority, and tried to reform a kingdom drowning in corruption. She was even excommunicated for backing the wrong pope during the Western Schism. You know you've reached peak medieval queen status when both your relatives and the Vatican want you dead. Eventually, she was overthrown by Charles of Durazzo, yet another cousin, who invaded Naples, imprisoned her, and had her smothered with a pillow. Given her track record with husbands and relatives, it might have felt almost familiar. Joanna ruled with boldness in a man's world, married her way through half the royal bloodlines of Europe, and died in the arms of someone who probably shared her great-great-grandparents, a true monarch of her time. Isabella Clara Eugenia was born in 1566, daughter to Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, a union between close cousins that made her one of the most genetically Habsburg children in existence. By this point, the family had stopped pretending it was about diplomacy and had fully embraced its status as a walking, talking genetic experiment with a crown budget. From the moment she could hold a pen, Isabella was trained to rule, and in Habsburg terms, that meant mastering statecraft, Catholic orthodoxy, and how to smile politely when someone referred to your uncle as your cousin, because he probably was. Philip II adored her, perhaps because she was intelligent, elegant, and politically astute, or maybe simply because she didn't try to rebel or marry outside the royal blood loop. She was seen as a strong contender to inherit the entire Spanish Empire. But the problem of male preference succession meant her fate would inevitably be determined by marriage. And naturally, she was paired with Archduke Albert of Austria, her cousin. Of course, together they were made co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands, which basically meant they were given the keys to one of Europe's most volatile regions and told to keep the place from falling apart while reporting everything back to Madrid. And yet, Isabella handled it all with grace, intelligence, and unwavering Habsburg resolve. She ruled with sharp intelligence, a religious intensity that bordered on scholarly, and the steady composure of someone who had not only read every papal decree ever issued, but probably corrected the Latin grammar along the way, all while micromanaging every detail of her court like a monarch with a magnifying glass. Her marriage to Albert was said to be peaceful, perhaps even content, likely made easier by the fact that they shared enough DNA to potentially skip verbal communication altogether. After Albert's death in 1621, Isabella didn't retreat from power. In fact, she leaned in further. She continued ruling alone as governor, representing the Spanish crown, and took religious vows, dressing as a nun. But don't mistake the habit for hesitation. She remained as active as ever. She negotiated peace treaties, kept rebellious provinces relatively loyal, and even oversaw the day-to-day running of a functioning postal service. That's right, the Habsburgs entrusted her with diplomacy, military defense, civil administration, and international mail. Honestly, that's bordering on sainthood. Isabella died in 1633, leaving behind the rare Habsburg legacy of actual competence, proof that just occasionally, centuries of interbreeding could produce more than twitchy jaws and awkward monarchs. Mary of Burgundy was born in 1457, the sole heir of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and Isabella of Bourbon. From birth, she carried the weight of a vast inheritance, a treasury of noble alliances, and the expectation that she'd wed someone suitably blue-blooded, ideally someone with a last name already familiar from family dinners. When her father Charles died in battle, Mary, just 19, suddenly found herself ruler of one of Europe's richest and most politically volatile territories. Burgundy was a prize everyone wanted. The French, the Habsburgs, neighboring dukes, and especially her ever-helpful cousins. To stabilize her realm, she married Maximilian of Austria, future Holy Roman Emperor, and, naturally, her second cousin once removed. In Habsburg circles, that barely registered as incest, more like a mild tradition. Their marriage was a diplomatic masterstroke. Maximilian gained access to the West-Burgundian lands, and Mary got a husband who could negotiate and sword fight, sometimes both in the same hour. Remarkably, their union was also said to be affectionate, which, for a dynastic match, bordered on scandalous. But Mary's reign was short, fraught with constant tension from France, rebellious Flemish cities, and aristocrats who firmly believed a woman's place was at the embroidery hoop, not at the negotiation table. Mary pushed back. She signed the Great Privilege, granting her people new rights, governed alongside her husband, and essentially ran a medieval superpower while juggling a child on one arm. Then came tragedy. In 1482, while hunting, a favorite pastime of the dangerously bored aristocracy, Mary was thrown from her horse, broke her back, and died at just 25. Her death was sudden and devastating, sending Maximilian into mourning and igniting a scramble across Europe for control of her children. Her passing marked a turning point. Burgundy, once independent and mighty, was absorbed into the Habsburg machine through her son, Philip the Handsome. Yes, that Philip, the one who married Joanna, the mad, and passed his jawline, and arguably his emotional turbulence, to half of Europe. Maria Theresa of Austria was born in 1717, the only surviving child of Emperor Charles VI. Her arrival was met with royal indifference, not because she lacked pedigree, but because she wasn't male. Still, Charles, either a visionary or dangerously optimistic, issued the pragmatic sanction, an imperial decree that basically said, yes, she's a woman. Yes, she gets the empire. Deal with it. Spoiler alert, Europe did not deal with it well. When Charles VI died in 1740, Maria Theresa inherited the Habsburg dominions, and a colossal diplomatic disaster. Nearly every European power challenged her right to rule, not because she lacked skill, but because she had the audacity to wear a crown without first growing a beard. Ironically, she had married a cousin. Maria Theresa's husband was Francis Stephen of Lorraine, technically a distant relative, because even when challenging gender norms, the Habsburgs never challenged the gene pool. Together, they had 16 children. Yes, 16, including future emperors, queens, and Marie Antoinette, she of the cake-based quote, an unfortunate ending. With that many offspring, Maria Theresa didn't just pass on titles. She passed on a tsunami of chromosomes. But she was no pampered figurehead. While frequently pregnant, she reformed the military, reorganized taxes, centralized the government, and modernized education. It's the sort of multitasking that would leave modern CEOs gasping into their third espresso shot. Of course, being a Habsburg, she also maintained a solid commitment to micromanagement, Catholic conservatism, and recycling family marriages like they were sacred family recipes. The result? A continent-wide spread of increasingly interconnected Habsburg cousins, Europe's most stubbornly rooted royal ivy. Maria Theresa ruled until her death in 1780, having survived wars, outlived her husband, and firmly stamped the Habsburg name into the Enlightenment. Her son, Joseph, later Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, inherited not only her empire, but the complex genetic legacy she had so diligently expanded. Born in 1384, Yolande of Aragon was royal from cradle to grave. The daughter of King John I of Aragon and Violent of Bar, her family tree wasn't so much a tree as a looping series of noble surnames repeated like a liturgical chant. Half her relatives were eligible spouses, and the other half were probably in the matchmaking queue. Yolande was sharp, politically aware, and, by medieval standards, alarmingly opinionated. This made her a prized match and a royal headache for anyone expecting a silent, obedient queen. She married Louis II of Anjou, a French prince, and yes, her cousin, because in medieval royal circles, shared great-grandparents were basically the gold standard of compatibility. As Duchess of Anjou and Queen Consort of Naples mostly on parchment, Yolande refused to be a background figure. She was the power behind the curtain, the financier of armies, the negotiator of alliances, and one of the few royals to support Joan of Arc and survive the political fallout, while her husband floundered in his quest for various thrones. Yolande ran the operations. She raised armies, brokered deals, managed estates, and carefully married off her children, frequently to other cousins, of course, with an eye for both strategy and just the right amount of acceptable Habsburg blood. Her son René of Anjou became known as the Good, likely thanks to inheriting his mother's intellect and only a few of her family's chromosomal quirks. Her daughter Marie married Charles VII of France, giving Yolande not just influence at court, but backstage access to Joan of Arc's campaigns. Yolande was no stitched-on name in the family tree. She was a strategist, a behind-the-scenes monarch, and a force powerful enough to bend wars without ever brandishing a sword. She died in 1442, having outlasted husbands, enemies, and the worst of the 100 Years' War. Inbred? Absolutely, but also incisive, fearless, and decades ahead of her time. Margaret of York was born in 1446 to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, two people so dripping in noble titles they could barely walk into a room without needing a scribe to announce them. As the sister of Edward IV, Richard III, and a walking embodiment of the War of the Roses, Margaret had intrigue stitched into her DNA, so it made perfect sense that she'd marry Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, a man renowned for his imperial ambition, love of warfare, and, most importantly, his spot in her extended family tree. Their union in 1468 wasn't about love. It was about rattling France. Margaret brought prestige and royal English connections, and Charles brought ambition, armor, and a beard sharp enough to challenge swordsmen. Despite the political maneuvering, the marriage turned out to be surprisingly functional, possibly even respectful. Margaret adapted well to life at the Burgundian court, which was less medieval mud and more pre-Renaissance glam, thanks silk-draped chambers, jewel-covered lapdogs, and a near-dangerous obsession with luxury embroidery. Her sharp intellect and gift for diplomacy quickly earned her the title, the Great Lady of the Netherlands. Margaret wasn't just a figurehead. She welcomed dignitaries with grace, balanced court finances with precision, and even managed diplomatic correspondence whenever Charles was off doing typical Charles things, usually launching wars you rarely had the time or tactics to finish. When Charles eventually met his predictable end on the battlefield, Margaret didn't fold her gowns, retreat to a priory, or fade quietly into the background. Quite the opposite. She leaned in harder. She stepped into the role of regent for her stepdaughter, Mary of Burgundy, and became a close advisor to her stepson-in-law, Maximilian of Austria. Yes, that Maximilian, the one who married Mary and single-handedly spread the Habsburg surname across Europe like an especially confident virus. Although Margaret never had children of her own, her impact on European dynastic politics was massive. She helped raise Philip the Handsome, the man who would go on to marry Joanna, the mad and father Emperor Charles V. So if you're looking for the origin point of the Habsburg dynasty's chin-forward, crown-clutching ambition, Margaret helped mold it. She passed away in 1503, having outlived her brothers, most of her rivals, and the final glow of Burgundy's golden age. She may not have added another knot to the Habsburgs' famously tangled family tree, but rest assured, she cinched the existing ones tighter, with unmatched etiquette and just the right touch of royal smugness to make it stick. Catherine de' Medici was born in 1519 into the powerful yet occasionally scandal-prone Medici clan of Florence. Technically speaking, she wasn't born inbred, at least not by Habsburg metrics, which meant a few branches of her family tree still included strangers. But don't worry, she quickly caught up by marrying into the French royal family. She made up for any lack of genetic entanglement and produced a whole generation of royals who could have passed for each other in dim lighting. Her husband, Henry II of France, wasn't her cousin, shockingly, but politically, the match was pure strategy. Italy met France, money met military, and Medici ambition married Bourbon theatrics. Catherine adapted fast. She arrived in France with little influence, a suspiciously Italian accent, and an awkward third party in her marriage, Diane de Poitiers, her husband's famously public mistress. Still, Catherine bided her time. Over the next decade, she quietly built alliances, studied the court's power games, and produced 10 children. Yes, 10, and most of them would go on to marry cousins. Because while Catherine wasn't born a Habsburg, she certainly parentied like one. When Henry died in a freak jousting accident, because nothing screams chivalric overcompensation like taking a splinter to the eye for glory, Catherine stepped fully into power as Queen Mother. Her sons Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III each wore the crown, while Catherine effectively ruled from behind the scenes. Deeply Catholic yet politically pragmatic, she sometimes funded Protestant weddings, and other times arranged for Protestants to be killed at those weddings. Cough St. Bartholomew's Day massacre cough. That move earned her quite a reputation, one that stuck, even in an era when royal poisonings were considered light appetizers. Catherine was blamed for nearly everything: religious wars, court decadence, suspiciously timed deaths, but she was also a patron of the arts, a shrewd operator, and the glue holding the Valois dynasty together through scandals, civil war, and tense family dinners that likely required food tasters and a strong vintage. She died in 1589, politically exhausted but still scheming, having left behind a legacy of royals who bore a striking resemblance to one another and governed with a mix of charm, Catholic guilt, and the unwavering embrace of cousinhood. In ancient Greece, falling asleep wasn't just about getting some rest. It was a spiritual undertaking, a sacred bridge to the divine. And nowhere was that idea more real than in the Asclepia, the dream temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing. These weren't your average shrines. They were sprawling centers of mystical medicine and transformation, where people came not just for cures, but for revelations. Before lying down to dream, you couldn't just yawn and curl up. You had to undergo ritual purification. Pilgrims fasted for days, bathed in sacred springs, offered animal sacrifices, and even practiced mental abstinence, purging inappropriate thoughts as thoroughly as they scrubbed their bodies. Only after this spiritual detox could they enter the Abaton, a dark, unclosed sleeping chamber where the magic happened. They lay down on stone slabs or animal skins as torches flickered along the walls. Priests murmured incantations, and the air filled with sacred incense. Here, sleep wasn't passive. It was an intentional descent into the divine. Dreams were considered sacred messages from Asclepius himself, symbolic guidance for healing, or sometimes extremely literal instructions. If you dreamed of snakes slithering across your body, that was a good thing. Snakes were sacred to Asclepius, seen as emblems of rejuvenation and divine power. In fact, harmless snakes roamed freely inside the temple, even the sleeping chambers. Yes, people went to bed surrounded by snakes, on purpose. In the morning, temple priests, acting more like spiritual therapists than physicians, would interpret the visions. Sometimes they offered herbal cures or dietary advice. Other times, the dream alone was believed to have healed the soul, realigned the spirit, and set the body back on track. The dream temples of ancient Greece remind us that for the ancients, sleep wasn't just biological. It was sacred. It was a journey into the unseen, a whispered conversation with the divine. And if the gods spoke back, you might wake up healed or reborn. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't viewed as simple rest. It was seen as a kind of temporary death, a nightly departure of the soul, or ba, from the body into otherworldly realms. To navigate that journey and ward off spiritual danger, Egyptians, especially priests and the wealthy, followed nighttime rituals that were part mysticism, part medicine, and entirely celestial in meaning. Before bed, they prepared not just their beds, but their souls. Burning incense, particularly frankincense and myrrh, was central to the process. These weren't just pleasant scents. They were sacred tools believed to purge the room of malevolent spirits, attract divine protection, and elevate the soul. The curling smoke rising into the night sky symbolized prayers ascending to the gods, surrounding the sleeper in an invisible shield. Next came chants or spoken prayers, sometimes whispered in solitude, other times recited by temple priests. These weren't bedtime stories. They were spiritual armor, guiding the soul's nightly voyage through a cosmic maze of gods, trials, and shadows. These ancient Egyptian sleep spells weren't merely gentle bedtime verses. They served as active spiritual defenses. They invoked deities such as Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and dreams, or Bes, a fierce, lion-faced dwarf god famous for protecting sleepers from nightmares and malicious spirits. Images of Bes were carved onto headboards or painted on bedroom walls. His grotesque features weren't just decorative. They were meant to frighten away anything lurking in the darkness. The bedroom itself wasn't simply a place to rest. It was a sacred space, prepared with precision. Beds were typically raised, crafted from wood or woven reeds, and often built with amulets or protective symbols integrated into the structure. Special headrests, by modern standards, wildly uncomfortable, were designed not for support, but for spiritual alignment. Egyptians believed these supported the soul's connection to the stars during sleep. Orientation mattered deeply. Many aligned their sleep toward the rising sun or toward Orion, the constellation tied to Osiris and the afterlife. If a person experienced troubling dreams or sought divine insight, they might turn to a temple, especially those devoted to Serapis or Imhotep. There, they could undergo dream incubation rituals, remarkably similar to those practiced in ancient Greece. These rituals included sacred chanting, aromatic oils, and burning incense, not to induce sleep passively, but to invite the divine into the sleeping mind. For ancient Egyptians, going to bed was never just about comfort. It was a ritualized choreography meant to balance the body, soul, and stars. Sleep was dangerous. Sleep was sacred, and every night held the potential for divine communion. or spiritual peril. In ancient Babylon, the line between dreams and destiny was barely perceptible. Sleep wasn't a passive escape. It was an active, spiritual terrain teeming with omens, messages, and the ever-present risk of supernatural interference. Babylonians took dreams seriously, so seriously, in fact, that they built entire professions around them. Dream priests, known as Shalu, were trained interpreters of the visions that came to both kings and commoners. Before bedtime, many Babylonians performed rituals designed to safeguard their subconscious. The hope was to attract divine visions and ward off unwanted ones. Dreams could be sent by benevolent gods like Marduk or Ishtar, but they could just as easily come from wandering spirits or malevolent entities. To guard against these, people wore protective amulets, placed talismans beneath their beds, and drew magical symbols around their sleeping quarters, a kind of spiritual security perimeter. Incense was essential. They burned juniper, cedarwood, and tamarisk at dusk, not simply to fragrance the room, but to sanctify the air and appease divine forces. To Babylonians, sleep wasn't just downtime. It was a sacred portal, and the gods, as always, preferred a clean entrance. Nightly prayers and incantations were common, spoken requests for clarity, protection from false visions, and safe passage through the dreamscape. When facing difficult decisions, whether to go to war, sow crops, or propose marriage, people often practiced dream incubation, sleeping in temples or beneath open skies in hopes of receiving unmistakable guidance from the divine. And when dreams came, they weren't forgotten. They were recorded on clay tablets, sometimes even illustrated with depictions of their symbols. Over time, these observations turned into dream dictionaries, catalogs of meanings. Dream of a lion? Expect military success. Dream of drowning? Betrayal may be near. These ancient Babylonian texts were so comprehensive, they would go on to influence Greek and Roman dream interpretations for centuries. To the Babylonians, dreams were not psychological noise. They were coded divine messages, and every night was a chance to listen, provided you followed the right rituals, and the gods were willing to speak. In the early Vedic world of ancient India, sleep was far more than just a physiological need. It was a sacred cosmic occurrence. According to the Vedas, texts composed thousands of years ago, sleep marked the temporary return of the Atman, or soul, to Brahman, the universal divine essence. Each morning was a spiritual rebirth, and like all sacred journeys, it required preparation, discipline, and reverence. One of the most vital aspects of sleep in Vedic tradition was breath control, or pranayama. Practitioners were taught to slow their breath and calm their thoughts before bed, not to fall asleep faster, but to bring the breath into harmony with the rhythm of the cosmos. This wasn't a metaphor. It was considered essential for a peaceful, undisturbed journey of the soul through the night. Vedic sages warned that poor sleep could cause confusion, spiritual disarray, or even karmic imbalance. So rituals were followed carefully. Evening mantras were recited, Sanskrit hymns that praised divine beings or asked for spiritual protection during sleep. The Gayatri mantra was especially common, whispered quietly while facing the direction of the setting sun. Even the direction one slept mattered. Lying with your head to the north was considered inauspicious. It aligned with the land of death. South was also avoided. East, symbolizing knowledge and renewal, or west, symbolizing rest, were preferred. Bedding was natural, often made from kusha grass, cotton, or animal hides. These materials weren't random. They were believed to influence the purity and clarity of one's dreams. Oils and herbs also played a crucial role. According to ancient Ayurvedic texts, a nightly massage with warm sesame oil, called abhyanga, was believed to soothe the nerves, ease tension, and prepare the mind for deep, restorative rest. Herbal infusions of ashwagandha, brahmi, or tulsi were burned or consumed to promote insightful, lucid dreams. Dreams themselves were deeply symbolic, mirrors of the soul, shaped by desire, karma, and spiritual purity. A disturbing dream wasn't dismissed. It was interpreted as a signal that the soul might be out of balance. In some cases, dream interpretation required consultation with a rishi or spiritual teacher. In Vedic thought, sleep wasn't a break from life. It was a return, a sacred reunion with the self, guided by breath, protected by mantra, and watched over by the divine. In ancient China, particularly under Taoist influence, sleep was more than just a nightly rest. It was an energetic rebalancing, a sacred window where the body recalibrated its inner harmony and the spirit ventured beyond the physical plane. To sleep well wasn't just about exhaustion. It was about alignment with the natural rhythms of the universe. Taoist philosophy taught that the human body contained qi, the life force energy, flowing through channels known as meridians. If this flow became disrupted, sleep would suffer. So bedtime wasn't approached casually. It was prepared for with great intention. Nightly rituals aimed to preserve and direct qi properly. These included specific dietary practices, breathing techniques, posture adjustments, and even careful timing of sleep cycles. The goal was to ensure that the body's energy remained in harmony with the cosmos, and that the spirit could journey freely during rest. You didn't just drift off to sleep, you entered a sacred ritual, a process of aligning the body's energy with the forces of heaven and earth. Taoist monks developed pre-sleep practices, such as Qigong, a sequence of slow, mindful movements paired with deep, intentional breathing. These exercises were often followed by silent meditation to calm the Shen, the spirit believed to dwell in the heart. If the Shen was disturbed by emotional stress, an unhealthy diet, or even too much noise, it was thought to result in nightmares, restless sleep, or even spiritual disturbances during the night. The sleep environment itself was a carefully curated space. Beds were crafted from wood or bamboo, materials considered ideal for promoting the healthy flow of qi. Headrests were intentionally firm and low to ensure that the body remained aligned and energy could circulate smoothly. Rooms were sparsely decorated, not for minimalist aesthetics, but to prevent overstimulation of the senses. Cleanliness was more than a preference. It was considered a form of energetic hygiene. Even sleeping posture mattered. Lying on the right side was believed to aid digestion and enhance dream clarity, while the direction of the head and feet was aligned with geomantic principles, a spiritual precursor to what would later be formalized as feng shui. Dreams themselves weren't dismissed as mental leftovers. They were journeys undertaken by the Hun, the ethereal soul, while the Po, the corporeal soul, remained with the body. The Hun was free to wander spiritual realms during sleep. If a person woke up feeling exhausted or frightened, it was believed that their Hun may have gotten lost or attacked in the spirit world. To prevent such outcomes, protective talismans or cinnabar-based charms were often tucked beneath pillows or worn to bed. Taoists didn't treat dreams as mere subconscious theater. They saw them as diagnostic tools, spiritual roadmaps, revealing imbalances in energy or unresolved karmic patterns. When practiced properly, sleep became a form of internal alchemy, a nightly act of transformation, a way to refine the soul and edge a little closer to immortality, one dream at a time. Long before European contact, many indigenous American nations regarded sleep and dreaming not as biological downtime, but as sacred portals to spiritual wisdom, ancestral guidance, and personal transformation. Among the Lakota, Navajo, Hopi, and many others, dreams weren't just private experiences. They were messages from the cosmos, capable of influencing personal destinies or even tribal decisions. Nighttime rituals varied across cultures, but a common thread was the belief that dreams served as direct conduits to the spirit world, often mediated through animal guides, ancestors, or divine beings. Preparing for this connection was serious business. Ritual purification was essential, and one of the most widespread practices was the sweat lodge, a dome-shaped steam bath designed to purify both body and spirit. Participants would sit in intense heat, chanting prayers and sacred songs, releasing physical and emotional toxins before sleep, inviting clarity and guidance. For those seeking deeper vision, particularly young men on the cusp of adulthood, the vision quest served as a rite of passage. This sacred journey involved fasting, solitude, and sleeping under the stars for several nights, usually in a remote natural setting. The goal wasn't mere endurance. It was to receive a dream powerful enough to reveal their life's calling. Upon return, the dream was interpreted by tribal elders or shamans and could determine their future path: healer, warrior, storyteller, or leader. In daily life, dream catchers were woven into both ritual and routine. Originating with the Anishinaabe people, these webs of sinew and beads were hung above sleeping spaces to filter out bad dreams while allowing good ones to pass through. By morning, the trapped nightmares were believed to dissolve with the sunlight. For children, dream catchers offered both symbolic protection and early lessons about the power and purpose of dreaming. Tribal elders often held the honored role of dream keepers, guardians of symbolic knowledge, capable of interpreting even the most cryptic of dreams. A bear might represent inner strength, while a hawk could signal incoming change or danger. These interpretations weren't dismissed as folklore. They were central to life, dreams were discussed around fires, woven into origin stories, and sometimes even factored into decisions affecting the entire tribe. Among indigenous American cultures, sleep wasn't an escape. It was a sacred conversation with the unseen, a chance to receive blessings, warnings, or purpose from the spirit world. In ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, sleep and dreaming were inextricably bound to the divine. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and later the Babylonians believed that each night was ruled by powerful gods, and every dream was a message sent through the veil of sleep. To them, sleeping wasn't a passive state. It was a deliberate form of communication, and preparing for it was a ritual in itself. Mesopotamian mythology included a pantheon of deities associated with dreams, the most notable being Nanch, goddess of prophecy, wisdom, and the justice of dreams. Her temples welcomed those seeking guidance during sacred festivals, especially times when the spiritual boundaries between worlds were considered thinner. Worshippers engaged in dream incubation, sleeping inside temple courtyards or sacred chambers in hopes of receiving visions. Before entering these sleep sanctuaries, they underwent ritual purification, washing in the Tigris or Euphrates, anointing themselves with perfumed oils, and reciting invocations to Nanch or Ea, the god of magic and insight. These steps weren't optional. They were seen as spiritual prescriptions from priests for those facing illness, moral dilemmas, or major political choices. Even in ordinary homes, sleep spaces were protected with care. Clay tablets inscribed with prayers or protective spells were placed beneath pillows or hung above beds to guard against demonic forces, particularly Lamistu, a terrifying night demon blamed for harming children and mothers. Amulets of Pazuzu, the winged demon slayer, were especially common, warding off evil while the soul wandered in dreams. Interpreting dreams wasn't guesswork. It was an esteemed science. Dream diviners, known as Baru, compiled vast libraries of dream symbolism, inscribing them onto clay tablets like early encyclopedias of the subconscious. A dream of a lion could signal royal favor, one of a collapsing house, potential disaster. Even the emotional tone of a dream was categorized. Joy, dread, laughter, all had predictive value. In Mesopotamia, sleep was never just rest. It was a ritual act, a divine risk, and an opportunity for revelation. Every night, the sleeper entered the domain of the gods, and they had better bring their prayers, protective charms, and a willingness to listen. Among the ancient Celtic peoples, from the mist-veiled highlands of Scotland to the sacred oak groves of Gaul, dreams were seen as bridges to the otherworld, a mystical parallel realm inhabited by ancestors, deities, and elemental spirits. Though the Celts left behind fewer written texts than their contemporaries, their oral traditions and Roman accounts reveal a rich, symbolic approach to sleep that pulsed with sacred meaning. Druids, the spiritual leaders and philosophers of Celtic society, believed the soul could journey into the otherworld during sleep, a realm not of the dead, but of deeper wisdom. Dreams were the soul's way of visiting this hidden dimension, where truths were clearer and the veils of illusion thinner. Preparing for such a journey required more than lying down. Ritual purification came first. Herbs like mugwort, vervain, and yarrow, plants still linked to dreaming today, were burned as incense or placed beneath pillows to enhance visionary clarity. Their fragrant smoke was believed to soften the barrier between worlds, allowing messages to pass through more easily. Some even brewed these herbs into teas or potions, consumed before bed with whispered prayers to the Aosai, the fair folk, or to gods like Brigid and the Dagda. Sacred sleeping spots were also chosen with care. Stone circles, forest clearings, or hilltops believed to hold spiritual power were favored. These were considered energetic hotspots where dream visions could be amplified. During Samhain, the Celtic New Year and festival of the ancestors, many would intentionally sleep in these liminal places to seek messages from departed kin. For warriors, sleep sometimes doubled as a tool of foresight. Before battle, some would fast, meditate, and sleep alone in caves or groves, hoping to receive omens in their dreams. These visions might dictate whether to fight, flee, or seek alliance. In Celtic tradition, sleep wasn't a timeout, it was a tuning in, a moment when the soul slipped beyond mortal concerns and into a realm of deeper knowing. These dreams were believed to carry powerful omens, signs that could foretell triumph or looming disaster, and they were taken with the utmost gravity. Symbols that appeared in dreams, be they animals, specific colors, or shifting landscapes, were brought before the Fili, Celtic poets and mystic seers, who interpreted them in lyrical verse. A white stag, for instance, might signify transformation and a spiritual turning point. A dream of drowning within a dark forest could suggest betrayal from someone close. These visions weren't dismissed. They were woven directly into Celtic mythology, shaping individual destinies and the shared stories of entire communities. In the Celtic worldview, the night wasn't silent. It hummed with whispers from the other world, carried into the minds of those pure, brave, or spiritually attuned enough to hear them. Meanwhile, in ancient Japan, the divide between sleep, sorcery, and the spirit world was handled with precise spiritual care, thanks to a belief system called Onmyoto, or the way of yin and yang, rooted in Taoist cosmology, enriched with Buddhist teachings, and closely tied to native Shinto beliefs. Onmyoto offered both nobles and commoners a framework for navigating the dangers and revelations of sleep. Central to Onmyoto was the idea that nighttime was dominated by yin, a mysterious, shadowy force that, while natural, could be dangerously unpredictable. Sleep made the soul vulnerable to spirit interference, especially from yokai, malicious entities, or orami. Lingering emotional grudges turned spiritual. Sleepers could also be influenced by negative directional energy, known as kataimi or badkon. To defend against such threats, people performed layered rituals of purification and spiritual shielding before bed. A common practice involved placing ofuda, ritual paper talismans inscribed with sacred charms, near futons or on bedroom walls. These were often blessed by onmyoji, trained specialists in exorcism astrology, and magical rites. Their purpose? To repel hostile spirits, trap nightmares, or redirect luck. Incense, especially sandalwood and agarwood, was burned not just for its calming scent, but to purify the space and please ancestral spirits who might otherwise grow restless. In aristocratic households, it was customary to recite Buddhist sutras before sleep, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently. These chants were believed to calm the Kokoro heart-mind and create a sacred boundary around the soul. Directionality mattered too. North was strictly avoided for sleeping, as it was associated with death and spiritual decline. Sensitive individuals were advised to sleep facing west or southeast, aligned with favorable celestial forces. Children, being especially susceptible to spiritual harm, were guarded through the use of hitogata, paper or cloth dolls intended to absorb negativity or illness in the sleeper's place. Some believed these dolls could take on a child's burdens through the night and be ritually discarded the next day to prevent harm. Dreams themselves were meticulously documented in private journals or shared with monks, astrologers, or onmyoji. A dream of fire, or blood, or wild beasts might signal illness, betrayal, or a divine warning. In contrast, dreams of flying, blooming lotus flowers, or serene waterfalls were seen as signs of spiritual awakening or forthcoming blessings. Dreams were divine messages, but only the wise or the protected would emerge from sleep with their meaning intact. In ancient Japan, sleep wasn't merely a pause in the day. It was a nightly trial, a ritual crossing into unseen worlds, undertaken beneath the careful gaze of spirits and stars. Long before Alexandria rose to prominence along the Egyptian coast, there was Heraclion, known to Egyptians as Thonis. For centuries, it served as the primary maritime gateway into Egypt, a bustling city of trade, religion, and diplomacy. Here, Greek merchants bartered with Egyptian priests, and foreign envoys mingled with temple officials in a vibrant, multicultural exchange. But by the time medieval scholars began writing about Egypt's ancient past, Heraclion had vanished into mystery, its name preserved only in obscure texts and half-forgotten legends. Many dismissed it as myth, sort of Egyptian Atlantis, but it was real. Heraclion once sprawled across the Nile Delta, its canals winding between massive temples, palaces, and docks. Enormous stone statues of deities like Amun-Gareb and Horus stood like sentinels at the water's edge. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and far beyond anchored in its harbors to pay taxes and secure passage deeper into the Egyptian interior. Its customs house ranked among the most significant in the ancient world, and its religious ceremonies drew pharaohs seeking divine sanction for their reigns. So how does a city like that disappear? Between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE, Heraclion suffered a perfect storm of natural disasters. Earthquakes shattered its foundations. Rising sea levels crept across the delta. Most devastating of all was liquefaction, a sudden geologic event in which the ground itself turned to liquid. Entire quarters of the city sank beneath the Mediterranean. Silt and shifting tides buried what was left. Heraclion was literally swallowed by the sea. erased from sight for over 1,000 years. Only whispers remained in the writings of Herodotus, in Greek inscriptions, in rumors passed from scholar to scholar. Most believed it was lost forever, until the year 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Frank Godiot made an astonishing discovery beneath the waves of Aboukir Bay. Hidden beneath 30 feet of sediment, a city began to re-emerge, preserved like an ancient time capsule. Monumental statues, sunken ships, gold coins, and inscribed steely surface slowly revealing that Heraclion hadn't been lost. It had simply been sleeping beneath the sea. At its peak, Heraclion was far more than a harbor outpost. It was Egypt's international heart, a vital checkpoint where all maritime trade flowed. Located near the canopic mouth of the Nile, it served as both commercial hub and cultural gatekeeper. Ships arrived bearing olive oil, incense, silver, cedarwood, and luxury fabrics. In exchange, Egypt exported its finest offerings: papyrus, linen, glassware, grain, and gold. Every transaction was logged, taxed, and often blessed, overseen by temple officials and colossal deities carved in stone. To the Greeks, Heraclion was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Its temples weren't just religious centers, they were towering stone fortresses. One temple in particular, dedicated to Amun-Gareb, was used for ritual coronations. Pharaohs came here to be spiritually endorsed by the gods, a vital act of legitimacy. Yet Heraclion wasn't just sacred, it was cosmopolitan. Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, and Libyans lived, worked, and worshipped side by side. Bilingual inscriptions, jewelry, religious amulets, and even detailed tax records have been recovered from the site, all testifying to a city that thrived not on separation, but on connection. To date, Frank Godiot's team has uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, along with thousands of artifacts that piece together the rhythms of ancient commerce and ceremony. Ceramic vessels, bronze anchors, coins, and temple records, all sleeping beneath the waves for centuries. Heraclion was not just a city. It was a living symbol of Egypt's openness to the wider world. Its disappearance was a mystery, its rediscovery a revelation, a reminder that history sometimes hides, not in books, but beneath the tides, waiting for the patient and the brave to find it again. Collected from incoming trade, gold flowed to the state, incense rose to honor the gods. In essence, Heraclion was the maritime heart of Egypt, a city where sacred ritual and global commerce walked hand in hand. It stood at the threshold of the Nile, welcoming merchants, emissaries, and offerings from across the known world, while fiercely guarding Egypt's mysteries until the sea claimed it. One of the most breathtaking revelations about Heraclion didn't come from coins or shipwrecks, but from the grand temples that still slumber beneath the water. These weren't tucked away sanctuaries or modest chapels. They were sprawling, monumental complexes, constructed from solid granite and limestone, dedicated to gods who reigned not just over Egypt, but the entire cosmos. At the center of it all stood the towering temple of Amun-Gareb, a sacred structure of immense political and spiritual weight. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was where pharaohs underwent divine affirmation, performing sacred rites to confirm their rule. Heraclion was far more than a maritime checkpoint. It was a coronation site, a spiritual gateway where rulers bound themselves to the divine principle of Mot, the cosmic order. And what's truly astonishing is how much of that world still remains. When Frank Gaudio and his team descended into the silt-drenched waters of Abu Qir Bay, they encountered colossal statues, many still upright, defying centuries beneath the sea. Some stood over 5 meters tall, including an enormous representation of Hapi, god of abundance, and the Nile's life-giving floods. Others depicted queens and pharaohs, carved with such precision, it's as if the artists had chiseled them only yesterday. Even more remarkable were the stelae, massive inscribed stone slabs. One, in particular, stood out, the Decree of Nectanebo I, a royal proclamation carved into granite, listing temple rites and religious statutes. Its survival beneath the Mediterranean is nothing short of miraculous, and its existence proves beyond doubt that Heraclion wasn't legend. It was a powerful religious capital endorsed and upheld by Egypt's royal house. The temples of Heraclion weren't just spiritual hubs. They were treasuries of knowledge and wealth. Offerings from across the Mediterranean world poured in. Gold vessels, alabaster jars, incense burners, ritual daggers, statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus lined the sanctuaries. Ceremonial boats used during sacred processions have even been found submerged, some of them stunningly preserved. Altogether, these findings reveal a truth long hidden. Heraclion wasn't just a busy port. It was a holy city. The rituals held within its walls shaped the fate of kings, blessed the flow of commerce, and linked this world to the divine. Today, those rituals lie frozen in stone, silent under the sea, but no less sacred for it. Heraclion, once lost, had been buried by centuries of silt and water, erased from maps, and dismissed by many as legend. But in the year 2000, that silence was finally broken. French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio, backed by the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, made a discovery that left historians and scientists stunned. The submerged ruins of a city thought to have vanished forever. Gaudio had spent years analyzing ancient records and navigating the murky waters off Egypt's northern coast, specifically Abu Qir Bay, just beyond modern-day Alexandria. The area had long been suspected of hiding ancient secrets. Clues were scattered through the works of Herodotus, Strabo, and Egyptian texts, all pointing toward a once mighty city consumed by the sea. But until Gaudio's expedition, no one had found definitive proof. Using state-of-the-art sonar and magnetometry, his team scanned the seafloor, detecting strange anomalies buried under meters of silt. What emerged was more than a few artifacts. It was a fully intact underwater metropolis. Streets, canals, temples, statues, and shipwrecks, all preserved in the anoxic depths, protected for centuries by thick layers of sediment. Among the first discoveries were 2 towering 5-meter statues, likely depicting a ruling king and queen of Heraclion, emerging like ghosts from the sand. Not long after, a massive bilingual stele, etched in both ancient Egyptian and Greek, was raised from the seabed. Its text confirmed what many had long theorized. Daunis and Heraclion were not two cities, but the same, known by different names depending on who was sailing into port. Over the following years, Godio's team uncovered over 70 shipwrecks, countless coins, ceremonial vessels, religious statues, and temple artifacts. What made this discovery extraordinary wasn't just the scope, it was the condition. Unlike ruins on land, these relics were untouched by looters or weather. They were snapshots of a lost civilization, frozen beneath the waves. Godio's rediscovery of Heraclion wasn't merely a scientific achievement, it was a resurrection. A city long thought myth was re-emerging from the deep, offering a rare, breathtaking glimpse into a forgotten world. And perhaps most thrilling of all, only a fraction of Heraclion has been excavated. Much of the city still rests below, waiting quietly for the next dive. Heraclion's rise was brilliant, but its fall was quiet, gradual, and hauntingly complete. Unlike cities erased in flames or by invading armies, Heraclion slipped into the sea inch by inch. Its decline was a slow unraveling, the kind of geological death that doesn't leave smoke or screams, just silence and loss. It began with earthquakes. The Nile Delta rests upon a seismically active zone, and Heraclion's foundations were built atop soft, waterlogged silt rather than bedrock. Repeated tremors over the centuries slowly weakened this unstable ground. But it wasn't just tectonic activity that doomed the city. It was a natural process called liquefaction. Liquefaction occurs when the ground becomes so saturated with water that it essentially turns to liquid, unable to bear the weight above it. Picture solid earth suddenly becoming quicksand. That's what happened beneath Heraclion. As the earthquakes continued and the sea crept further inland, the city's ground gave way. Buildings, docks, entire neighborhoods began to sink into the mud. Over time, temples tilted and disappeared. Streets became canals, and canals turned into open sea. Heraclion, once a center of trade and ritual, was rendered uninhabitable. Gradually, commercial activity shifted west, toward the rising city of Alexandria, which began to eclipse Heraclion in power and influence. By the end of the 2nd century BCE, Heraclion had begun to fade. By the 8th century CE, it had vanished almost entirely beneath the Mediterranean. And what's perhaps most unsettling is how little anyone could do. There was no dramatic evacuation, no final act of desperation. The people of Heraclion adapted as best they could. They rebuilt, they worshipped, they hoped, until one day, their city was simply gone. Boats continued to glide across the bay, unaware they were sailing above lost streets and sunken gods. Fishermen cast their nets where once processions of priests walked. Over the centuries, even Heraclion's name began to dissolve, first from maps, then from memory. What remains today are relics pulled from the deep, silent witnesses to a world swallowed by time and water. Heraclion's story is more than an archaeological triumph. It's a haunting reminder Even the greatest cities can vanish, not with a scream, but with a whisper, not by war, but by nature's patient, relentless hand. A vivid image emerges of what life may have once looked like in this vibrant Egyptian port city. Heraclion wasn't merely a ceremonial or political outpost. It was a living, breathing metropolis, filled with the rhythms of daily life. It bustled with marketplaces, temple courtyards, residential quarters, and busy shipyards. People didn't just pass through Heraclion. They lived there, worshipped there, traded their goods, debated in courtyards, and dreamed of futures shaped by both land and sea. Underwater surveys of the site have helped reconstruct the city's layout, a maze of canals that wound between stone buildings and harbors. Boats were the lifeblood of Heraclion, ferrying people and goods along its watery streets in much the same way carts moved through other ancient cities. This earned Heraclion the nickname, the Venice of Egypt, though it predates Venice by more than a millennium. The city's architectural style reflected a fusion of worlds. Egyptian design elements like towering pylons, sacred obelisks, and sprawling temple courts stood side by side with Hellenistic flourishes brought in by Greek settlers. The inhabitants themselves formed a diverse and international population. Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and traders from far-reaching maritime communities. Unearthed artifacts include Greek amphorae, Egyptian scarabs, and gold coins imprinted with the faces of various rulers. This cultural blend meant that Heraclion was multilingual and multi-faith. It was common for several languages to be spoken under a single roof. Families offered daily prayers to different gods, some Greek, some Egyptian, often at the same altar. Religion wasn't a separate sphere from everyday life. It was woven into the fabric of the city. Morning offerings to deities like Amun, Isis, and Osiris were as routine as preparing breakfast. Temples weren't only sacred, they were economic and administrative centers. They employed scribes, artisans, and priests. They stored wealth, oversaw legal matters, and even collected taxes. One stele recovered from the seabed spells out in detail the protocols of temple life, including the taxation of imported goods, underscoring how closely faith and finance were linked. Food in Heraclion came from both soil and sea. Thanks to the nutrient-rich, brackish waters of the Nile Delta, fish and shellfish were plentiful. Inland farms supplied grains, figs, and barley for beer. Markets near the docks must have been lively, colorful places, bursting with spices, woven textiles, and rumors from foreign lands. And the city was never lacking in spectacle. Statues and carvings depict scenes of dancing, musical performance, and vibrant festivals, especially those honoring Osiris, which often featured elaborate boat parades and public theatrical rituals. Heraclion wasn't just practical, it was joyful, it was alive. In the end, Heraclion was more than a port, more than a holy city. It was a home, its people living ordinary lives under the gaze of immense stone gods, unaware that their world would one day vanish and become legend, preserved beneath the waves. As Heraclion's prominence began to wane, Another city was rising just a few sails away along the coast, Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. Alexandria didn't just follow in Heraclian's footsteps. It eventually overshadowed it, evolving into the crown jewel of the Mediterranean and Egypt's new hub for maritime commerce and intellectual brilliance. Yet the story between the two wasn't just rivalry. It was transition. It was evolution. At the height of Heraclian's influence, Egypt was still under native rule. The city thrived because of its religious importance and its strategic position near the Nile Delta's mouth. It was the gateway where foreign ships were taxed, where rulers legitimized their reign through sacred rituals. But when the Ptolemies, Greek successors to Alexander, took control of Egypt, they reoriented the entire kingdom toward Hellenistic ideals. Alexandria became their showpiece, a new capital designed with grandeur, ambition, and Greek urban planning in mind. The city boasted the world's most famous library, a lighthouse considered one of the seven wonders, and a vast harbor system that redirected Egypt's trade routes. With that redirection came decline. The Ptolemies channeled commerce away from Heraclian and into their own city, bypassing the old port in favor of a fresh start. Alexandria wasn't just a trading post. It became a cultural engine, bringing Greek governance, philosophy, and aesthetics into Egypt's bloodstream. Still, Heraclian didn't vanish overnight. For a time, both cities coexisted. Temples in Heraclian continued to function, and religious festivals were still held, but the balance had tipped. Political authority, economic power, and elite attention all shifted westward. Heraclian faded, not with fire or conquest, but with quiet neglect, and nature delivered the final blow. The earth beneath Heraclian, soft water saturated silt, began to betray the city. Rising sea levels combined with earthquakes caused liquefaction, a process where solid ground suddenly behaves like liquid. Foundations buckled, whole neighborhoods sank. Eventually, Heraclian disappeared beneath the Mediterranean, swallowed without a trace. Meanwhile, Alexandria, built on more stable terrain, remained above water, absorbing the trade, attention, and spiritual legacy that once belonged to Heraclian. Today, the ruins of both cities whisper different tales. Alexandria still stands, though much of its classical grandeur is gone. Heraclian, in contrast, rests beneath the sea, silent, but remarkably well preserved. It reminds us that while one city rose, the other became a memory, buried in silt and salt, yet never truly lost. When Heraclian vanished beneath the waves, it didn't just take with it columns, temples, and courtyards. It carried away the memories, possessions, and sacred artifacts of a once thriving people. But thanks to the oxygen-starved, silt-rich waters of Abukir Bay, many of these items were preserved in astonishing condition, like a time capsule sealed by the sea. Among the most jaw-dropping discoveries are the colossal statues, some towering over 5 meters tall. These include likenesses of Ptolemaic rulers, depictions of Egyptian gods like Isis and Hapi, and even massive sphinxes. Many were discovered exactly where they had fallen, surrounded by shattered temple ruins. as though the very moment of collapse had been captured and frozen in mud. Their carved expressions, postures, and hieroglyphic inscriptions remain visible, testament to the skill of Heraclion's artisans and a haunting echo of its lost grandeur. Yet it's not only the monumental that survived. Divers have recovered thousands of smaller relics, gold coins, bronze ceremonial tools, jewelry, pottery fragments, and more. Among them was a stunning cache of bronze ritual vessels, adorned with intricate carvings and religious emblems. These were likely used in temple rites, echoing the city's spiritual heartbeat. Other finds include oil lamps, writing instruments, personal charms, and adornments, the sort of things a person might have carried in a satchel, worn around their neck, or placed carefully on a household altar. Heraclion's legacy as a maritime power also remains evident. More than 70 ancient shipwrecks have been discovered, many still containing their cargo. Wooden hulls, stone anchors, rigging gear, and nautical tools give researchers invaluable insights into ancient trade and navigation. Some of these ships appear to have sunk while still docked, suggesting that they went down during the very seismic upheavals that destroyed the city. Perhaps most intriguing are the stele and bilingual inscriptions, written in both ancient Egyptian and Greek. These aren't just decorative. They are formal documents, royal decrees, temple protocols, and economic records. One crucial inscription confirmed that Thonis and Heraclion were, in fact, the same city, solving a puzzle that had baffled historians for generations. In this way, the sea became Heraclion's accidental museum, a place of loss, yes, but also of incredible preservation. Each artifact recovered is more than a relic. It is a whisper from a vanished world, a coin dropped in a marketplace, a statue carved for ceremony, a ship caught mid-voyage. Together, they tell a story of a city that once stood at the edge of land and sea, at the crossroads of cultures, and at the heart of a mighty civilization. Heraclion may now rest underwater, but its story is far from over. In fact, its rediscovery has transformed how we view ancient Egypt's relationship with the sea, with foreign powers, and with divine ritual. What was once dismissed as fable, a name murmured by Herodotus, half believed by skeptical scholars, has become a landmark revelation. In many ways, Heraclion challenges the narrow image of ancient Egypt as a desert-bound, river-focused society. This was a seafaring city, cosmopolitan, outward-looking, and adaptable. Its culture wasn't fixed in time. It evolved, it welcomed outsiders, and it fused foreign ideas with its own deep spiritual traditions. For modern archaeologists and historians, Heraclion is a treasure trove, not only of objects, but of insight. It fills in vital gaps in our understanding of Egypt's late dynastic and early Hellenistic periods. It shows how port cities worked, how temples acted as spiritual and bureaucratic centers, and how a civilization could be undone not by war, but by waves. But more than that, it humanizes the past. The wrecked ships, the ceremonial tools, the coins and amulets, they belong to real people. Priests whispering invocations, sailors docking under the gaze of colossal statues, mothers praying to Isis for their children's safety. All of that life preserved in silence. Now, after 1,000 years of sleep, it speaks again. And Heraclion's rediscovery has reshaped not only our understanding of the past, but our vision of the future of archaeology. In a world where sea levels are rising and coastlines are shifting, we're beginning to realize how many stories might still lie beneath the waves. From lost cities in the Mediterranean to sunken ports in India and Southeast Asia, Heraclion is now a blueprint, a map not just of where we've been, but of where we still might look. Today, the treasures of Heraclion sit safely behind glass in museums. Its legend is retold through documentaries and written histories. Yet, the city itself still slumbers beneath the Mediterranean, largely unexplored, vast, and waiting. Heraclion is no longer considered a myth, but it remains a puzzle, a ghost city suspended between two worlds, whispering fragments of its story across time from a submerged age of gods, commerce, and vanished empires, long before fluoride toothpaste or titanium crowns. Early humans had already discovered a painful truth. Toothaches are miserable, and rather than simply suffering in silence, they tried to do something about it. Surprisingly, the history of dental care stretches back nearly 9,000 years, offering proof that prehistoric humans were far more inventive than we give them credit for. In the Mehrgarh region of modern-day Pakistan, archaeologists uncovered human remains dating as far back as 7,000 BC. What they found was nothing short of astonishing. Multiple adult skulls with teeth that had been precisely drilled using flint tools. These weren't the results of injury or accidents. They were intentional, deliberate boreholes, carefully drilled into the tooth enamel. And yes, they survived the process. There's no trace of pain relief, no anesthesia, no numbing agents, just stone tools, raw grit, and an extraordinary tolerance for agony in pursuit of healing. It's believed they used bowstring drills, similar to ancient fire-starting tools, to spin sharpened flint into decaying molars. This is, to date, the earliest known form of dentistry, predating even ancient Egypt by thousands of years. Why go through such pain? Most likely, to remove infected tissue, drain abscesses, or ease chronic pressure. Some teeth even showed traces of resin or bitumen, which may have served as crude fillings, suggesting an early attempt at sealing the treated cavities. This wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Across other prehistoric communities, evidence shows people were pulling, filing, and even staining teeth. Among certain African and Indonesian cultures, modifying the teeth had spiritual or social meanings. It wasn't always about health, but also about identity or protection. Still, one thing is clear. Humans valued their teeth. And even in those early chapters of our history, people were already crafting ways to combat decay and infection, and they had good reason to try. In a world without antibiotics, a simple tooth infection could become a deadly ordeal. Fever, swelling, and systemic infection were real threats. For some, having a molar drilled out with a flint shard might have meant the difference between life and death. So while they didn't have numbing gel or porcelain veneers, Our prehistoric ancestors weren't helpless. They met dental pain with sharp stones, astonishing bravery, and an ingenuity that would lay the groundwork for everything that followed. When it comes to ancient medicine, Egypt often claims the spotlight, and for good reason. Egyptian practitioners didn't just acknowledge dental problems. They treated them with both medical precision and religious fervor. In fact, the world's first known dentist was an Egyptian, a man named Ra, who lived around 2600 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. His tomb proudly bears the title Chief of Dentists and Physicians, signaling that oral care was already a specialized and prestigious profession in Egypt's Old Kingdom. But if you're imagining a serene clinic with gentle tools and grateful patients, think again. Egyptian dentistry was a curious mix of practical treatment and magical ritual. One of the oldest surviving medical documents, the Ebers Papyrus, written more than 3,500 years ago, contains remedies for toothaches, gum disease, and oral infections. Some prescriptions used natural antibiotics, like chewed herbs or honey, both known for their antimicrobial properties. Others veered into spiritual territory, involving the placement of a dead mouse on the affected tooth, accompanied by spoken spells to drive out the evil spirits causing the pain. Not exactly something modern dentistry would endorse. Still, Egyptians had a strong grasp of oral hygiene. They fashioned primitive toothbrushes from aromatic twigs, freshened breath with fragrant herbs, and even developed rudimentary toothpaste. The early blend, made from crushed ox hooves, eggshells, pumice, and myrrh, wasn't exactly mint-flavored, but it got the job done, and they didn't stop at hygiene. Examinations of mummified skulls reveal attempts at dental surgery. Some showed drilled molars similar to those found in prehistoric Pakistan, while others have abscesses that were likely drained intentionally. Evidence also points to crude splints used to stabilize loose teeth, possibly early forms of braces. Perhaps most intriguing are the gold wires and metal bands found in a handful of remains. These may represent the earliest dental bridges, used either in life or placed ceremonially after death. Regardless, they show a deep, creative concern with maintaining the structure of the mouth. So, Egyptian dentistry was never just about soothing pain. It was part ritual, part science, interweaving knowledge of infection, surgical attempts, and spiritual healing. They may not have had anesthesia, but they had ambition, and in the ancient world, that made all the difference. While the Egyptians were mixing myrrh and pumice into gritty pastes, the Etruscans of ancient Italy were advancing dentistry in a very different and dazzling direction. For them, oral care wasn't just about function. It was about elegance, status, and aesthetics. Long before the Roman Empire took control of the Mediterranean, the Etruscans were crafting what may be the world's first dental prosthetics, gold-bound bridges designed to replace missing teeth. Dating back to around 700 BC, Etruscan tombs have yielded skulls fitted with delicate gold bands and wire ligatures holding replacement teeth in place. And these weren't synthetic substitutes. In many cases, the new teeth were actual human or animal teeth, often oxen, carefully anchored beside the living ones. These weren't do-it-yourself solutions for farmers. They were custom-made dental devices, likely fashioned by skilled metalworkers and commissioned by the elite. The gold bands were malleable enough to mold, yet sturdy enough to support biting pressure, an impressive technological feat for the time. More than just medical devices, these bridges were social statements. In a culture where physical appearance was deeply tied to nobility, dignity, and legacy, missing teeth were unacceptable. The Etruscans understood, long before modern cosmetic dentistry, that the loss of teeth affected not only speech and eating, but also facial symmetry and perceived beauty. Even in death, appearance mattered. Many of these gold-bound dental pieces were left in place during burial, indicating they were used in life and considered part of one's identity, just like fine jewelry or family insignia. There's little direct evidence that the Etruscans performed surgical extractions or complex oral procedures, but their prosthetic craftsmanship tells us they actively managed oral health, at least among the upper classes, and they did so with a strong emphasis on presentation and artistry, like their elaborate tomb paintings and finely worked gold necklaces. Etruscan dental bridges remind us that these ancient people valued beauty and legacy, even down to the placement of every tooth. In a world without implants or dentures, a gleaming smile held in place by gold wires was more than medical innovation. It was a symbol of identity and elegance, a mark of a civilization ahead of its time. By the time Rome rose to dominate the Mediterranean, the practice of dentistry had grown into a complex blend of surgical methods, herbal remedies, and cosmetic flair. But it was the groundwork laid by places like Heraclion, Merogar, Egypt, and Etruria that made such advancements possible. The Romans didn't merely adopt medical wisdom from the Etruscans and Greeks. They systematized it, expanded its scope, and added their own signature blend of discipline and flair. Think of it as ancient dentistry, Roman style, regimented, efficient, and rinsed with vinegar. One of the most prominent Roman medical authors, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, documented a range of dental procedures in his renowned medical Text de Medicina. He outlined methods for pulling teeth, easing dental pain, and cleansing the mouth using abrasive powders. These powders were concocted from materials like crushed bones, charcoal, and ground oyster shells, a gritty mix designed to scour away decay. And then there's the detail that makes modern stomachs turn. Some of these recipes called for urine. As revolting as it sounds today, it actually made sense to them. Urine contains ammonia, a natural cleaning agent. In fact, Romans went as far as bottling and importing urine from provinces like Gaul and Lusitania, modern-day Portugal, to use as a mouthwash. Yes, you heard that right. Elite Romans would gargle fermented ammonia for whiter teeth, vanity triumphing over revulsion, followed perhaps by a rinse of vinegar or wine to freshen the breath. Beyond hygiene, Roman dentists, or medical practitioners moonlighting as such, used a variety of metal instruments, forceps, scalpels, and elevators for extractions and oral procedures. These tools have been discovered in archaeological digs, often stored in surgical kits, showing that while dental work was painful, it was not rare. For Roman soldiers, dental care was considered essential. A soldier couldn't fight if he was sidelined by an infected tooth or abscess. Oral health was part of combat readiness. Meanwhile, the wealthy elite had access to early forms of dental prosthetics, often inspired by the Etruscans, gold-wired bridges, replacement teeth crafted from ivory, bone, or sometimes even stone. Much like their predecessors, the Romans saw a healthy, gleaming smile as a marker of status, beauty, and social standing, especially in the highly visible public spaces like the Forum or the baths. Even the philosopher Pliny the Elder had his say, suggesting bizarre remedies like burned mouse ash for toothaches or chewing mint leaves to improve breath. His eccentric advice may sound odd today, but it reflects just how intertwined oral health was with daily Roman life. So yes, Roman dentistry could be brutal, but it was also progressive in its own way. Painful, certainly. Sometimes strange, but always pursued with the Roman ideals of hygiene, control, and presentation. A clean mouth wasn't just a preference. It was a civic virtue. While Mediterranean civilizations were scrubbing their teeth with crushed shells and rinsing with vinegar, the Maya of Mesoamerica were elevating dentistry into something far more spiritual and artistic. For the Maya, oral modification wasn't simply about health, it was about status, ritual, and cosmic identity. They didn't just treat teeth. They sculpted, carved, and adorned them, often with precious stones. All of this was done without anesthesia, and astonishingly, often without serious complications. Archaeologists have unearthed ancient skulls from modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras displaying intricate dental work over 1,000 years old. Elite individuals had jade, turquoise, obsidian, and hematite inlaid into their front teeth, not as a posthumous decoration, but while they were alive. These inlays were embedded into precisely drilled cavities, created using early rotary tools, with tips made of sharpened stone, likely obsidian. To affix the stones, the Maya used powdered quartz, plant resins, or water as lubricants and adhesives. The precision is remarkable. The drilled holes are so symmetrical that researchers believe Maya artisans had a deep, if intuitive, understanding of dental anatomy. Even more surprising, there's little evidence of infection or nerve damage, proof that these procedures were performed with skill and success. But why endure the pain? Because for the Maya, the mouth was sacred. It was where breath and speech, the very forces of life and spirit, originated. Modifying teeth was a way to connect with the divine, display one's rank, or align with cosmic energy. Jade, for instance, symbolized life, fertility, and divine favor. So a ruler with jade-encrusted teeth wasn't just flaunting wealth, they were projecting sacred authority. The Maya also practiced tooth filing, reshaping incisors and canines into points, glyphs, or even animal-like forms. These shapes weren't just decorative, they were deeply symbolic, invoking spiritual protection or transformation. And not all modifications were symbolic. There's evidence of filled cavities, drained abscesses, and other practical treatments, clear signs that Maya dental work also addressed medical issues. So long before Europe caught up, Maya dentistry stood as a fusion of aesthetics, medicine, and mysticism, a worldview quite literally etched into every glittering smile. In ancient China, dentistry wasn't a separate branch of science. Instead, it was seamlessly woven into the broader tapestry of traditional Chinese medicine TCM. Chinese physicians didn't isolate the mouth from the rest of the body. To them, a sore tooth wasn't just a dental issue, it reflected deeper imbalances in internal organs, often linked to the kidneys or stomach. The health of the mouth, like all things, depended on the balance of qi, or life energy, throughout the body. As early as 3000 BC, Chinese texts like the Huangdi Nijing, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, documented dental concerns. Ancient practitioners mapped out meridians, or energy channels, that connected each tooth to a corresponding organ. For instance, pain in a lower molar might point to digestive or bladder issues. Their approach was holistic. Rather than directly attacking a symptom, they sought to restore energetic balance. Treatment often included changes in diet, herbal therapies, and acupuncture, not just for pain relief, but for healing the system as a whole. Daily hygiene was emphasized. People used fragrant twigs from trees like willow or miswak to clean their teeth, functioning much like toothbrushes. Saltwater rinses, crushed herbs, and powdered bones were all common cleaning methods. Tooth powders might include clove, cinnamon, rhubarb root, mint, and ginseng, all believed to strengthen gums, ease inflammation, and refresh the breath. When it came to pain, acupuncture was the preferred remedy. Needles were placed not just near the jaw, but along points in the neck, hands, and arms to relieve tension and stimulate natural healing. Additionally, ancient Chinese records mention the use of dragon bones, fossilized animal bones believed to contain strong life energy. These were ground into powder and sometimes combined with wine or herbal mixtures to form a kind of early toothpaste or healing salve. Unlike in other civilizations, there's little archaeological evidence of surgical extractions or invasive procedures. That wasn't due to ignorance, but rather to a strong cultural emphasis on preservation over removal. In many ways, this early Chinese philosophy mirrors modern holistic dentistry: preventive care, gentle methods, and an understanding that a healthy mouth starts with a healthy body. In ancient India, dental health was treated not as a separate issue, but as a key component of the body's energy flow, central to the principles of Ayurveda, the traditional system of Indian medicine that's over 3,000 years old. Texts like the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain extensive sections on oral health, from diseases of the teeth to detailed treatment protocols, some of which align closely with modern techniques. The Ayurvedic approach focused on prevention, cleansing, and daily rituals. One of the most enduring is Dantadavana, or the daily cleaning of teeth using herbal chewing sticks. These came from trees like neem, licorice, and peepal, all known for their antibacterial properties. People would chew one end of the stick until it frayed, then use it like a brush to scrub the teeth and gums. This practice still survives in parts of rural India today. Ayurveda also introduced oil pulling, known as kavala or gandusha, swishing sesame or coconut oil in the mouth for several minutes. Far from a simple rinse, this was believed to extract toxins, strengthen the jaw, and improve gum health. Modern science has shown that oil pulling does, in fact, help reduce bacteria and inflammation, validating this ancient practice. The Sushruta Samhita, attributed to the pioneering surgeon Sushruta, includes chapters on tooth extraction, jaw fractures, and oral ulcers. He detailed the use of iron instruments to remove decayed teeth and drain abscesses, along with herbal antiseptics and even cauterization techniques. Sushruta viewed the mouth as a vital gateway to the body's overall well-being, and his surgical innovations made him one of the earliest contributors to organized dental medicine. For severe cases of tooth decay or gum disease, Ayurvedic practitioners would sometimes cauterize the infected area using a heated tool. Painful, yes, but also systematic. Ayurveda didn't treat dental issues as random misfortunes. It categorized them with precision. Conditions like Dantaharsha tooth sensitivity, Dantasharkara tartar buildup, and Dantaveshta gum inflammation were all recognized and named. Treatment wasn't one size fits all. It was personalized depending on an individual's dosha or body constitution, vata, pitta, or kapha. Remedies could include everything from adjusting one's diet to herbal rinses, or even meditative practices to relieve stress-related clenching and jaw tension. To the ancient Indians, the mouth wasn't just a physical structure, it was a sacred channel, a gateway through which breath, nourishment, and words passed. Keeping it healthy, clean, and balanced wasn't merely a matter of hygiene. It was a spiritual responsibility. In Ayurveda, dentistry wasn't separated from the rest of medicine. It was seen as a daily ritual of alignment, a connection between body, mind, and spirit. In the ancient Greek world, both medicine and dentistry were deeply shaped by observation, early anatomical study, and philosophical inquiry. Unlike civilizations that saw illness as purely supernatural, the Greeks, particularly from the classical period onward, pursued rational explanations for pain and disease, including problems with the teeth and gums. While they didn't have specialized dentists as we do today, their physicians practiced remarkably advanced oral care for the time. Philosophers and thinkers like Hippocrates and Aristotle wrote extensively about the structure, function, and ailments of teeth. Hippocrates, often regarded as the father of medicine, described tooth eruption, decay, and even extraction techniques. He believed that dental disease stemmed from imbalances in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a theory that framed many of their treatments. Greek physicians stressed the role of diet in oral health. Sticky, overly soft, or sweet foods were seen as contributors to decay, while rough, fibrous foods like apples, grains, and legumes were praised for helping to scrape debris from teeth. They also recommended chewing mastic gum, a resin from the mastic tree, to clean the mouth and freshen the breath, a practice that still endures in parts of the Mediterranean today. When dental issues arose, Greek treatments ranged from herbal concoctions and poultices to surgical intervention. Tooth extractions were typically done with metal forceps without anesthesia. Relief, when it came, was often through herbal sedatives like henbane, mandrake, or opium poppy. For abscesses, Greek physicians used lancing techniques to drain infection, followed by rinsing with salt water or wine to disinfect the wound. Aristotle, ever curious, delved deeply into the study of teeth, even making anatomical claims like the idea that men and women had different numbers of molars. While incorrect, it showed a genuine effort to catalog and understand the human body in detail. They also noted unusual dental conditions, delayed tooth eruption, congenital absence of teeth, or malformed dentition. In Greek thought, dentistry was not its own field, but an integral part of a general medical education. A physician treated everything from ulcers to fractures, and the mouth was simply another area of study. In essence, ancient Greek dentistry was a combination of science, observation, and resilience. It may not have been glamorous, but it was grounded in the belief that even the body's smallest parts, like teeth, could be studied, understood, and healed through learning and logic. Over thousands of years, and across countless civilizations, ancient dentistry didn't follow a single linear path. Instead, it unfolded like a tapestry woven with ritual, innovation, and necessity, a global story told through pain, experimentation, and resilience. From the flint-drilled molars of prehistoric Pakistan to the golden dental bridges of the Etruscans, from jade-inlaid Mayan teeth to Ayurvedic oil pulling rituals in India, early cultures approached dental health with a mix of raw ingenuity, courage, and practicality. Though their tools were primitive and their pain relief minimal or entirely absent, many of these early societies made astonishingly sophisticated advances. They didn't understand bacteria. They had no concept of X-rays, but they recognized something universal. Rotting teeth caused suffering, and something had to be done, whether that meant drilling out decay with sharpened stone, packing cavities with herbal resins, or constructing ornate prosthetics to preserve the face's symmetry. These healers, be they priests, doctors, or artisans moonlighting as surgeons, laid the groundwork for a profession that still evolves today. And what's most remarkable is how interdisciplinary early dental care really was. It wasn't just a matter of medicine. It was spiritual, cosmetic, philosophical, and even political. In some cultures, a jewel-studded smile reflected divine blessing or high social rank. In others, a crooked or missing tooth was seen as a sign of spiritual imbalance, or even as a warning from the gods. Oral health, it turns out, has always been about more than just eating. It was about identity, ritual, and survival. The tools and records they left behind, obsidian blades, copper hooks, golden wire ligatures, herbal manuscripts, are fragments of an ongoing story. They prove that ancient people, far from being naive or superstitious, were careful observers, creative problem solvers, and bold experimenters. They watched, they tried, they adapted, and they passed down what worked. Many of their ideas still linger today. We still brush, rinse, and floss, We use natural ingredients like clove, mint, and myrrh, materials once found in ancient scrolls. Some people still chew neem sticks or practice oil pulling, not as a novelty, but because it remains effective. Modern dentistry, with its implants, lasers, and 3D modeling, may feel galaxies removed from stone drills and mouse skull poultices. But in truth, the mission remains unchanged. Relieve pain, preserve teeth, improve lives.